Welcome to the Pat Flynn Show, where we teach you how to become an expert generalist, or better than most people at most things. Get in shape, start a business, learn a musical instrument, master any skill, and find your self-discipline by using the same principles you would in the weight room: repetition and resistance, so you can become an overall more successful and interesting person. Let's get started. Folks, welcome back to the Pat Flynn Show. After much anticipation, we are finally joined by the man who needs no introduction, Dan John. But the problem, Dan, is every time I hear a podcast with you, somebody says that you're the person with no introduction, that I don't think I've ever heard an introduction to you. And I actually have no idea who you are.
Well, actually, I'm glad you said that, because honestly, I don't think anyone cares as long as the content is good. And I've felt that my whole life.
Yes, I agree.
It's like people have these 20-minute introductions at these workshops. The person gets up there and lays a bomb, and it's like, let's go through all those letters again in the name. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what do you want to hear? What do you want to know?
Oh, I mean, there's so much that we can talk about, and I hope that we do talk about. So you're kind of joking before, and we weren't joking. I mean, you told me straight up, you're like, hey, I'm the ultimate generalist. I teach religious studies. I'm training for So are you really training for another Olympic lifting competition right now?
Yeah, well, this is what I told you. Okay, so I teach at the college level in religious studies. I teach at another college, strength and conditioning, in Twickenham, London. I teach at another college. I'm the strength and throws coach. I do that because it's fun, okay? In my wandering weights, I'm doing a big study of the book J.H. White's 1938 version of The Sword and the Stone. I'm doing a paragraph by paragraph thing. But when you talk about being a generalist, I think one of the reasons I've been successful is because that's exactly the concept that I try to follow. You and I have talked about being minimalist before, mm-hmm. but it's not. I think one of the things that people miss is that when you learn something over here, it enriches, it nourishes everything else you do. The oddest thing about being around the best and the brightest is, when you're out with a football coach, you don't talk football. You might talk about speedboats. You might talk about, when you're out with baseball players, almost always it's about finance. Every conversation is about money. And if you want to make it as a strength coach, I guess, one of the most things you have to be is a lot more eclectic than people think. A friend of mine noted that when I'm at a workshop and someone comes up to me and says, Dan, I love your work, really appreciate what you did, and shake my hand, I tend to say, hey, you want to go to lunch? But if they come up and say, I have 37 questions for you, I tend to say, I answer all 37, and then I say, it's very nice to meet you, and walk away. Because I don't want to go to lunch with somebody who wants to talk about strength training or what. I don't mind it. Obviously, I love it. But, sometimes there's more to a relationship, than just 5 sets of 2.
Well, I agree. And I'm sure that everybody is, ready to hear about the goblet squat. But I'm interested in, and this is something we haven't talked about before, but how long have you actually been teaching religious studies for?
1982.
1982. So I asked you not too long ago for some works on, if you remember, Thomas Aquinas, right?
Yeah.
And he's oddly enough, I stumbled on him years ago, and I tried to read, the Summa Theologica and Summa Contra.
It's pretty tough, yeah.
And that's exactly what I thought. I'm like, what the hell is this? No pun intended. So I had to get some study guides, but I got a tremendous amount out of it, out of what I eventually was able to understand. So this isn't really a question; it's just a conversation.
No, but you know what? You've touched on probably the best person to pick up. Okay, so Aquinas reads Aristotle, mm-hmm. and Aristotle came up with this thing. Aristotle read Pythagoras, mm-hmm. and what happened is, and Euclid, is Aristotle had these issues from Socrates and Plato that he wanted to discuss, and the way to get a language established, and there was a sign on the wall: if you don't understand geometry, don't come in. So Aristotle started the system of, if this is true, then this must follow, this must follow, this must follow. Mm-hmm. Aquinas if this is true, this must follow, this must follow, this must follow. If you're a good coach, I tell people all the time, so the ifs are your givens. What are your givens? If you have a small facility and you're playing in a really tough conference and you're not able to recruit and you're going to do everything exactly the same as your opponents, you're going to have a season with not a lot of wins. If you are Alabama and you have the best recruiting in the world for college football, then the biggest thing you should do is just not give away games. You don't have to be cute or clever. If you're Alabama, you don't have to go for it on fourth down. My point is this, is that geometry is the backbone, I think, of philosophy, theology, and coaching.
Well, that's really interesting. And if nothing else, there's an argument for generalism, because there's where you have an immediate carryover from one study or one interest into your life into another.
Well, exactly. And here's the funny thing. Now, you're coaching, okay? You're a coach. And you read a magazine article that a scientist did a study, for God's sakes, and proved that the exact opposite of what teaches your clients, what you do to your clients. So as an experienced coach, what's your if then on that?
Which that would never happen, right, Dan? Right.
No, it's called every single day of the week. I just went to a conference and listened to a whole bunch of nutritionists speak, and I did learn one great thing. The more choice you give humans, the fatter we get. Okay.
I can just, that was my lunch. So I can go ahead and verify that. You should have seen the size of the menu.
Exactly. I had some friends show up from Scotland. I took them over to Landmark Cafe, and they laughed because even in a small place like Landmark, there was probably 73 items to choose from. Whereas where they're from, there's breakfast and there's light breakfast, and so, but they're both lean. And okay, to get back to the point, what's important about this method. So let's jump one more step too. There's deduction, induction, and there's that other one that most people don't know called adduction, which is the method Sherlock Holmes uses. If you eliminate all the possibilities, whatever's left, no matter how, if it's not impossible, no matter how improbable it is, it's the answer. And I think as a good coach, you have to have deduction. Sometimes someone just walks in the room and there's an issue, but you can't explain it. Induction. And then sometimes something just tells you inside your head, this person can't drink milk. And so, wait, why is it milk?
Well,
because we eliminated everything else.
I think that's such an incredible point. And I think that's something that I really got out of studying philosophy and people like Aquinas, is it gives you the logical backbone or the logical lens to interpret a lot of the scientific data. And if nothing else, it kind of gives you a foolproof or a shock-proof shit detector in a lot of ways, right? If you know this, and then from this, these other things must follow, and something doesn't line up with that, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong, but you're going to have an easier time sniffing things out.
Yeah. Okay. So it'd be the BS detector, but it also could be the research problem that, sometimes researchers, for example, my wife points this out at times. She'll say to me, how many females were in the study? And I'll go, oh, sorry about that noise. She'll say, how many females were in that study? And I'll go, and she goes, because she's convinced that since women have massive hormonal fluctuations, typically about, every couple of weeks. And of course, when they turn about, I don't know, somewhere between 39 and 50, they have a massive hormonal fluctuation. If women aren't included in a fat loss study, there's no value to it. And I'm like, holy cow. Mm-hmm. So my BS detector leaked when Tiffany and I had this conversation because she gave me a whole new if to smell everything through.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And you can always rely on your wife too. That's always.
Well, because she's a badass, but also because it's funny. I'm not a misogynist. I'm a good person. I needed somebody else to fill my ifs in. If you study a bunch of 19-year-old college freshman boys and they do one set to exhaustion, they all get stronger. Well, yeah, no kidding. If they do 3 sets, they all get stronger. Well, yeah, no kidding. Take an elite athlete and do something and they improve 1%. Now I'm all ears.
Mm-hmm.
Take a bunch of 50-year-old women and improve their body mass somehow. Now I want to know what you're talking about. So, okay, so we don't want to get too far away, but the gift of Aquinas is he is a person that, and by the way, after I talked to him, I thought I should have just had you read the Pocket Aquinas.
No, that's what you gave me. And I actually had a hard time finding that.
Oh, yeah.
Which just because I guess it's kind of an old thing. It's an old person thing.
Probably from the late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Boy, they had some good books back then. Whew, that was a good era.
They don't make them like they used to.
Yeah. So let's dive into this. That's okay.
Well, I think we've already dove in. This is fascinating stuff. So what else is? And don't worry, we'll get to the Goblet Squat.
Okay.
What else? Like if I were to take Dan John's religious studies class, or what else have you found that by doing that has translated into this or whatever other thing that you're doing? I mean, I think we already made the argument of having some type of, understanding of logic it will carry over and enhance anything else that you're doing. I mean, writing, for example, right? I mean, writing is just being able to think in clear channels and right.
Yeah. Well, here's a good example. I read something from Art Devaney, 15, 20 years ago. It's when I first came online. And he made a very interesting point. He was trying to explain he was trying to explain a point about the way the human body works from economics. Now look at this. We have a professor of economics talking about evolutionary training, paleo fitness, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But not for dummies, just straight up paleo fitness.
Yeah,
okay?
for non-dummies.
For the non-dummites, okay? Mm-hmm. And he said, he was explaining the concept like this. If you try to organize, you got a stadium full of 65,000 people and the game ends, but you decide to organize how everybody leaves, and you practice and you train it, and everybody has a chart on where to go and when, and you really spend time on it. Let's say the whole stadium empties in 15 minutes. If you just let people do whatever the hell they want the first time, the stadium empties in about 9 minutes. So the more structure you put on things sometimes, the more and more messed up you make it. Mm-hmm. And I can remember sitting there going, that is by far the best explanation. Well, now there's 2 ways I can use. One, I can, if you're a believer, I like to say that's the best way to explain the Holy Spirit I've ever heard in my life. Mm-hmm. Instead of having the systematic, okay, step 1, all of you, things just happen and it all works out. And then I bounced it back into my coaching world. And that's when I realized that my best coaching is when I listen, I show my athletes something, they go and do it, what they think they heard that I said they thought, they then show me what they did. About half the time I'll go, well, yeah, that's a lot better than I was thinking. Mm-hmm. And so there is an example where a person studying economics takes their economic brain to try to help their diabetic wife and son, and that turns into the whole evolutionary fitness model. He is the founder of it, right? I mean, I found one other article from Runner's World back in the early 70s called Primitive Eating, but it's not the same thing.
Yep.
So an economist helping his wife and kid gets into fitness. I read it. I instantly transform it into the way I teach religious studies. And then I sit back on it and go, oh my God, this is the thing. This is why teaching all the kids stretch 1, 2, 3 in the discus and then let them go out and do it on their own it really worked better.
Well, you talk so much about, filling gaps. And I think that's what the generalist does, is it forms connections that the specialist often won't be able to see.
Can I talk about an interesting thing? There's going to be a couple of names. I'm going to use a couple of names. The guy who changed my life back in 1985 was a guy named Earl Nightingale. And I think I may have told you the story, but I was, suffering from a liver parasite from the Middle East. And I was living in a basement apartment with a fold out bed. And, my life wasn't going well. So I did the thing that I always do. I went to the library and I checked out books, and I checked out something called a cassette tape called
I remember those, yeah.
Called Lead the Field, and it was Earl Nightingale. And one of the things he said was, a rut is a grave with the ends kicked out. Okay, so that's step one. About 2 years later, 3 years later, Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell have that famous 8-part conversation called The Power of Myth. And I had, of course, used Campbell's work when I was getting my master's. But the point is, this time I got to listen to a dialogue. And he said something interesting. Joseph Campbell, the most famous, whatever you want, mythologist the world's ever seen, by far, never got a PhD. And the reason he didn't get a PhD was because he felt that once you get a PhD, you get stuck in a rut the rest of your life. And so I was at a place in my life where I was considering getting my doctorate. So listening to that, I said to myself, well, what do you like to do? And I realized that I like the buffet of life. I like to talk to you about paleo fitness. I like to talk about kettlebells. I'm getting ready for an Olympic lifting meet. Today in our workout, we did loaded carries up and down the street, and we invented some new ones. I love talking to Tim Anderson about original strength. I love reading The Sword and the Stone. I just reread blah, blah, blah. I'm watching some 1940s movies that I missed as a child I want to catch up on. I love that kind of thing. I don't want to spend my entire day proving whether or not it's one set or 3 sets that makes it work. I would shoot myself in the face.
Yeah, I mean, so a big argument that I'm making in the book that I'm writing about generalism is you're probably going to have an easier time being successful if you're not trying to be the best in the world. And that was something that I had to accept very early on. I was never going to be the best at anything, not at fitness, certainly not at sports. But I could be good at many different things and then combine them to, create a message that was unique. And that's sort of, how I developed myself, within the industry. But the other argument I make is you're just going to have a lot more fun in life too if you don't tie yourself to just one specific thing all the time.
Well, and also too, you mentioned being the most famous in the world. I couldn't tell you who the most famous squat researcher in the world is.
Yeah, I couldn't even tell you who the best squatter in the world is right now.
Yeah. Now, can I finish up the story? Just one small little funny thing is I found myself in a place, about 13 years later, so the late 90s, where I had an opportunity for free to get my doctorate of ministry, my DMin, okay? So I could, and I talked to Tiff about it. I went through this thing, and she'd already been with me when I was getting my religious studies education master's degree. And I said, it'll be just as much time, probably less work. I just don't know if I want to do it. So we had a fascinating conversation. So I filled out the paperwork. I took care of the stuff. Interesting. The school was, I donated because I had this, I was able to donate 40,000 books to them in scripture and theology because these couple of libraries I knew were closing. I just channeled all the stuff. So, that was a pretty good way to start. And our first assignment was to read a book called The 1 Minute Manager. This is a doctorate. And what you had to do for the assignment was to write before every chapter what you thought the chapter would be about, as you were reading how you felt about the chapter, and then when you finished, what insights you got about the chapter. And I realized that I had done that exact same thing in about 1986 or so for a thing, as a teacher education program. It was the exact same assignment. And I came home and I showed this to Tiff, and I said, I know in 4 years, everyone can call me Dr. Danny, and that would be fun. I could start my own talk show, cure people of bad squatting and, hey, your squat, you got to get over your knees more. No, widen them out. That's it.
Complete with the accent too. I like it.
Yeah. Hey, we got a phone call here. Yeah, gobble squats. That's what you need. Okay. Thank you, caller. Line two. Hi, how are you? Yeah. I'd say overhead squats. You're a problem.
No,
Thank you.
I mean, you'd have nailed it. It would have been a major success.
I don't know how. There's my moneymaker. But it was funny. What's funny about it is just as I was trying to get into specificity, the very first assignment reminded me of why I didn't want to go down that wormhole.
Mm-hmm.
It's because I would be doing, it's the old joke about what does PhD mean? Piled higher and deeper. Mm-hmm. And by the way, nothing against having doctorates. It's just for me, I like what I do. I like being able to read Jurassic Park and then pull out quotes from that book and put them in a book on preparing for, a weightlifting meter to track me. I like that.
And that's sort of the snare of specialization, isn't it? There are very dramatic trade-offs that you have to make if you want to be a specialist. You can't spend time with Jurassic Park if you're going for, your.
Yeah. You can't quote Goethe in a thing, a PubMed journal on, knee problems and front squatting. You can't do that. And I guess you could, but so that's my little story about how I got to the same place you are, is that, and I never really used the word generalist until I saw what you wrote on that. And it was like, yeah, that's the idea. And that's why I like, that when you do hang out with the top end of people in the performance industry, very often you will spend our time talking about books we just read. That's one thing about having dinner with John Duquesne. John Duquesne might be the best read person I've ever met in my life.
I believe that. Mm-hmm.
One other person I would say is Archbishop George Niederauer, my former boss, and my head of programming here, Michael Warren Brown. But here's the funny thing. I love talking to those, Bishop Niederauer's dead, but those three people, because every time you walk away, one of the first things you do is either, in Niederauer's case, I always cracked open a book and reread it. He believes rereading was the key. If a book's good enough to read once, you should read it a couple times.
That was a point did you ever read the book, How to Read a Book?
Oh my gosh, by the guy that came out with the
Adler.
Yep. Was it Mortimer Adler?
Mortimer J. Adler, yep.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Funny thing about that book, if you ever see the movie Rosemary's Baby,
mm-hmm.
that book is on the shelf.
Oh, is it really?
In one of the scenes, yeah. And okay, now this is how you know you're a geek. Uh-huh. When I saw it in the theater, I had to sneak in because I was under 16 or something like that, or under 17. And there's a scene. I look up and there's the book. I'm like, hey, I know that book.
That's hilarious because I probably read that book when I was around 16 or 17. Yeah. It was such an invaluable book for me because it sounds so silly, but it was one of the best books I've ever read because I've gotten so much more out of every book that I've ever read since.
Yeah, and that's why I say in these kinds of things all the time. David Denby's book, great books. And this is the genius of Denby is this. He went back to Columbia as a 40-plus-year-old male and retook the freshman reading. You have to take a Western canon reading curriculum if you go to Columbia. But here's the deal. When you read, if you don't have kids, Genesis 22 is when Abraham is asked to kill Isaac. When you're a 19-year-old stone college freshman, you just read it, or 14-year-old sophomore in high school, blah, 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 end of story. You read it as a father, it breaks your heart. He read King Lear with his mother going through dementia, and he said that he read King Lear in college, and it was words, words, words. He reads it with his mother going through dementia, and the whole story leaped off the page. I'll be honest with you. I mean, I'm very lucky with my daughters and their choices. But, reading Romeo and Juliet now would be radically different than reading Romeo and Juliet when I was a high school senior, say, or junior, whatever the best.
Yeah, it's often funny how things that you may have passed over before can often become something very profound later in life.
Yeah, and how are you going to have the time to reread Hamlet and reread the Count of Monte Cristo if you're spending all your time, 60 hours a week in the law firm, grinding away for the man?
Yeah, I don't know, because fortunately I've always successfully avoided being a specialist, and probably because I was never good enough to feel like I could be the best at anything that I dedicated that amount of time there.
Yeah, but then you look at your book, especially I would say paleo fitness. Though I do wish you'd put your other materials into something bound, the optimization stuff, and I did, and that some of your 28-day challenge stuff, and that the thing you did on eating, I thought was really good. And it was a Chronicles of Strength edition.
Yeah, I do need to get that all together in some spot.
I mean, just put it together and call it Stuff I Wrote.
Yeah, so I'll do that. It's Stuff I Wrote. That's perfect.
Yeah, and just but have it bound. But the thing is, just talk about what we just said. So you have the kettlebell workouts, you got the nutrition side, hormonal optimization side, and all of a sudden, and so when someone comes and says, "Where can I read more about your materials?" Very often I say, "Well, just read Paleo Fitness for Dummies," because he summed it much better than I can. But so that's what a gift that was. So you have to. I think the mistake we make when we go down the route of being a generalist, it could be, is that pretty good's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing,
great is still great. I try to preface that as much as I can in the stuff I've been writing is just because you're not the best in the world, that doesn't mean you still can't be a master of something. You can.
Yeah. And it is, and that's the one thing I always liked about the book Mastery. And it's not John Jerome's book; it's the other guy. And it's from the Esquire magazine. Shoot, do you mind if I just do this thing called Google?
Please.
Yeah. It's called Mastery by who can forget the book? But it's what Cervantes said. It's the road, not the end. Mm-hmm. And is it George Leonard? Yeah, George Leonard. Yeah, it's George Leonard. And
I'm taking notes on all this so we can have a huge list of Dan John resources once this is live.
And it was originally an Esquire magazine article, and Esquire said years later it was still the most requested reprint of all time. But here's what I got out of it. Okay, now my college coach told me on our first meeting, make yourself a slave to good habits, and then number 2, little and often over the long haul. Mm-hmm. And so I think I've told you this before, but I believe in the 3 F's: fitness, finance, and relationships are all based on little and often over the long haul.
Yeah.
Did you get my joke?
Yeah, I did. And should we repeat the joke that we started with before we hit the record button? It would be forced. It wouldn't be funny.
It'd be forced. So the truth is, if you're in a relationship, just screaming "I love you" at the wedding ceremony isn't nearly as important as, constantly reminding the person of your care and dedication. If you want to be a great discus thrower, you got to throw a little bit every day for years. And so I think that mastery might be an easier thing for a generalist because you're getting your other fields are enriching the other fields. I see it. Okay, you're not looking at my hand, are you?
No.
I'm doing an upward spiral with my hand. And if you know my work, you remember Sister Maria Sumpta told us when we were in 2nd grade that there's 4 things in life: work, rest, play, and pray. Mm-hmm. And she said the mistake you're going to make is when you try to push any one of those without keeping a balance of the others.
Yeah.
Well, as I often do, I thought about it a million times, and I realized that, this is the story I've repeated, but I'm going to tell you again, is when I had an opportunity to work 2 full-time jobs. I had a full-time day job as an administrator, but this is when I was first offered the job as a professor of religious studies. And I had to take it. But I also, for the time, needed both. So I had 2 full-time jobs, training as a pretty damn good discus thrower and raising 2 little girls. And I told my wife, if I'm going to take this job, we got to buy a hot tub. Because if I'm going to work harder, I've got to rest harder.
Mm-hmm.
And what we notice is that having a hot tub makes you play harder. But then I also often joke is that would save my daughter's lives through middle school is my wife every day would roll out of bed early in the morning by herself with a cup of coffee and would hot tub by herself.
Uh-huh.
She needed that alone time, which is prayer. She needed that alone time to put up with 2 teenage girls, a psychopathic husband, and all the other stresses of life for a modern American female. So what I would argue is the generalist, almost by design, balances work, rest, play, and pray. So those lessons you learn in playing your guitar, there's, you can freelance guitar playing, but you can also have to play chords sometimes. Sometimes you have to play with other people. Well, those lessons make you a much better coach.
They do. And that's something I talk a lot about is when I wasn't quite accurate. I did try to specialize very early on in my life in guitar. And you know what it did is it made me more of a technician and less of a musician. And I became way too involved with majoring in minors and trying to be the most technical guitar player that I could, that I couldn't really play well with bands. And I was more concerned about pyrotechnics than I was about effectiveness or writing music that people actually cared about. And it wasn't until I took more of a generalist approach and be like, okay, you know what? I don't need to be 100% the best guitar player. I could be 80%, which is still a master, and focus more on songwriting and mixing and producing and all these other skills that overall made me a much better musician. So I think that's kind of to your point.
Well, something you might not know about me is I'm an award-winning poet.
Well, I believe it. So
back in the day, I used to, with one of my professors who died tragically, Leonardo Alishawn, and of course Ken Brewer. He was the poet laureate of Utah. These were my mentors, and I used to. And then one day I won this big poetry contest, and everybody was so proud. And I walked up after, and they gave me a check for $25. And then I realized that maybe this isn't the field for me to get into, because when I get checks from for writing articles, do you hear that binging sound?
Just a tiny bit.
Okay, sorry.
It's all right. We can tolerate some binging sounds.
Sorry, people are.
Remember, Dan, I have an editor. Oh,
okay. Well, when people see me online, they start asking me questions about stuff. So, but here's the thing that poetry taught me. It's the importance of, first off, the utility of words. Mm-hmm. The one thing you want in poetry is you need to make the point. And you've got to do it without, you show people the point, you don't tell people the point. And that was number one. And the second thing it taught me was that great poems tell great stories. Mm-hmm. And so from there, I mean, if you look at my body of work, most of the time it's stories.
And yeah, one of the things that, if not the number one thing that people say about Dan John, is what a great storyteller he is, what a great writer he is. And there's definitely, I'm sure you'll confirm, there must have been a very strong connection there and maybe it wasn't directly obvious, but hey, you spending time with poetry and learning poetry obviously gave you some type of competitive advantage when you started writing fitness articles.
Well, yeah. Well, and the other thing that helped me when I started teaching, writing fitness articles, so I started lifting weights in 1965. I started coaching in 1979, and I had my first paid article in 2003. So I had a little bit of background when I started writing articles.
So you didn't start just writing fitness articles and then coaching people 10 years later.
Right. I mean, I go online sometimes and I'll read, and I'll read some stuff, and it's like, or people tell me, I mean, I get this all the time. They want to write a blog and make money off it. And I'm like, wait, you can make money off of a blog? Because I didn't know that. Because I will never charge anybody for my stuff online. For books and of course conferences or workshops. I mean, come on, I gotta be able to look my wife in the eye after I've been gone for 10 days and say, hey, here's a check. Okay, that's why I was gone. Yeah.
No, I get it. And you have my favorite. There's two newsletters that I always recommend to people. Yours and do you know Chris Brogan? Have you met Chris Brogan? He talks about you a lot. He's a fan of you. I just had him on my podcast. Chris is an author. He's in the business world, so he helps people with their businesses. But he talks about you a lot. So if you don't know him, I have to make the introduction.
Chris Brogan.
Chris Brogan, Brogan. I just had him on the show, and he's great. And the funny thing is, we talked about poetry and how poetry helped his writing. So if you haven't been introduced, I'll have to make that introduction because he's a big fan of your work and he's a great guy.
Well,
but I would recommend your newsletter and his because they're both so well written. They're both so helpful. They both provide such a wide variety of resources. And that's what I love about yours is I know whenever I open your Wandering Waits, I'm going to find something interesting. And I always do because it's eclectic,
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a big thing to me. I put in a whole series of articles a long time ago about winning at chess, winning at checkers, and people found that odd. And I'm like, well, hang on, it's not odd. It's it's fascinating.
There's a connection here.
Yeah.
And there's you made another point, and I want to bring it up before we forget it. I think it's really important, and it's something I'm trying to talk about in my book. So I think maybe hearing you talk about it will help me talk about it a little better. And you talked about process and success. So something that I've learned or I'm learning right now is to get away from the idea of success in the specialist sense, because I think what being a generalist means really enjoying just being in process as much as possible. And by focusing more on the process of mastery itself, which I think is what you were talking about, you'll have successes. The successes will come automatically, but you won't have completely tied your personal identity to succeeding in one specific thing, which I think is kind of a pitfall. At least it was for me. And it always kind of led to, well, I'm not really quite happy because I haven't been successful. And then when I get successful, I'm happy for 10 seconds. And then now what? Right?
Oh, well, I mean, sir, I've never heard it better than Cervantes. It's the road, not the inn. And, Tiff and I have talked about this many times about I've won events that I've been working on for a long time, and I'll get it. She'll say, I can look in your eyes and tell you it didn't mean that much. Mm-hmm. So one of the guys I like to read, John T. Reed, he says a lot of mean things and people hate him. But I tell you one thing, his book Succeeding, which is an interesting book, he cuts the line between success and reaching a goal. They're not the same thing. And the biggest mistake a lot of people make is I work with goal setting constantly. I'm a big fan of goal setting. I think it has a lot of value. But you also have to ask those other questions early in the process. Will you be successful if you get that goal? Mm-hmm. Just a friend recently died who got every goal he ever wanted, but he was he was the least successful person I ever met in my life. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about, he's a very famous person. Many are not going to mention his name because, the dead can't defend. Yep. So here he was with all the accolades, and the rest of his life was a miserable failure. And I hate to do this I learned a good thing years ago. And there's 4 people in the world live in the pure present: athletes, children, poets, including singers and all the rest, artists of all kinds, and the old are the only people who live in the pure present. And because the athlete and the actor say, I mean, what have you done for me lately? You might have been the gold medalist, but you took 8th this year. You suck, Mm-hmm. And of course, I saw Tom Cruise is coming out with a movie right now. I'm like, Oh God, really?
Yeah, he was just in that Mummy rendition, which I didn't see it,
And
but
no, nor did anyone else.
yeah, no,
But
I wasn't alone.
yeah, and it's funny because a couple decades ago, a Tom Cruise movie was like almost a must see for me,
Yep.
but one of the things that this person was the point they were making is, if you're going to live in the pure present, the pure present, it's your goals are going to be a lot different than someone who wants to be successful. That's an idea you might want to break out a little bit about generalism. So 2 points on this. Okay, Pat. Number one,
I'm taking notes.
Achieving a goal versus being successful. They always say that there's a cliche. When you climb the ladder of success, when you get to the top, you want to make sure you're on the right wall. That's basically that's the thing where you ask yourself, are you successful enough? That's why when someone says to me goal setting, I always run them through the Sister Maria Santa work, rest, play, pray. Will achieving this goal make your life better? I want to look better at my 40-year reunion. Okay, why will that make your life better? Well, because when you're trying to make yourself look better and you're married, your spouse is going to be like, why do you want to look better? Why not? I think you look fine now. Here, eat some cake. Because spouses tend to undermine fitness goals. Mm-hmm. Will this goal make your life better? Okay, you're going to go off to law school. You've got 3 kids in the home, all under 10, and you're going to go to law school all day long. Okay, how's that going to make your life better? Well, 4 years from now, I'll graduate from law school and pass the bar. Okay, and then what? Then I'll work 70 hours a week in a law firm. Okay, no problem at all. How will that make your life better? Well, after that, I might make partner. Okay, then what? Then my kids will hate my guts because I've never seen them in my life.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's so how does a person, and maybe this will, this will be very generalist here. Maybe this will take us back to theology. How does a person orient?
Well, how do you set your sights on a star? I mean, I've always said, you got to look at a couple things first. One thing you need to look at a little bit, no matter what the goal is your own DNA. They'll start there. Are you tall enough, fast enough? There is no way I would make a good transvestite. There's just, sorry, just my dog barking.
Sorry, I have 3 upstairs right now.
I would not make a good NBA player. My own DNA crushes me on this. Okay, stop it, Sarah. Okay. The next thing I always ask people: do you got the geography to support your goal? Usain Bolt comes from a country where sprinting is the national sport. There's no surprise that cities that have a lot of outdoor basketball courts with people playing 24 hours a day have good basketball. If you want to be a great soccer football player, Utah might not be the place to grow up. If you want to be a good skier, now maybe Utah's a good place, downhill skier. So does your geography, if you want to be the best surfer of all time and you're from Wisconsin, you probably don't understand geography as well as you should.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So then the other thing is your personality types. Obsessive compulsive people who are vain do very well in some of our sports that we work with.
Yeah, I believe that.
I mean, vanity is a real value for some of the people I work with. Offensive linemen aren't very vain. Doesn't help them to be very vain. It does help a bodybuilder. Mm-hmm. So that's the next area I start to go through, and these are very simple things. If there's a great book called C. Northcote Parkinson, it's called Parkinson's Law. Yeah. And one of my favorite parts of the book is, so young Mr. Farragut, why are you interested in joining in the Navy? And the kid goes through, well, my father's in the Navy, my grandfather's in the Navy, my uncle has a ship named after him, my great-grandfather died in the Battle of, Victory, and my cousins are all in the Navy, my mom and dad met at a Navy ball, my mother-in-law, that kid's going to join the Navy. The kid's DNA is for the Navy. The kid's worldview is the Navy. And I tell, that's why it's such a wonderful book to read, because it's probably from 1956, but a brilliant book about how systems work. And one thing I think about is, you look at families that are football families or wrestling families. Oh, you always want to have, if you have a family of 7 boys in Iowa and they love wrestling, that 7th boy is be pretty good, because he's got it. So that's everything I just said sounded elementary and simple, but you have to sit back and make sure that all measures up. A woman will come into you and say, I want to lose fat. And your internal, I got my hands over my head like they're scanning right now. Your internal scanning status is and what's coming out of her mouth doesn't match anything you see. And that is part of how you help people succeed, is to find places that they'll do well in. My friend Chris Long always talks about being the best opera singer in Rock Springs, Wyoming. Well, God bless you, but that's not the biggest stage in the world. And that's one thing I did like about La La Land, the movie, is that both of them are very passionate about their art and they're successful, and yet the girl had been putting on shows since she was little. She had set herself up to be successful as an actress, even in the face of getting shot down all the time. And if you want to be successful, especially if somebody else is going to hire you, you better get used to being shut down, shot down.
Yeah, I'm. Lord knows that I'm sure you have too, but I've certainly had my share of rejections.
Well, but in 2017, with the internet and self-publishing, with the internet and YouTube, if you're a stand-up comedian and you could do a good YouTube show and find your niche. 1997, you couldn't do that.
Yeah.
As a musician, you can. And you did recently. You put out some of your own music, which I listened to, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you.
And you might not have been able to do that in 1967. Certainly not in 1957.
I couldn't do it back in 2004. Right.
So we are at a place where, and here's the thing, true greatness will rise up. I always think about that guy who worked in the patent office, who doodled, and his name was Albert Einstein. Mm-hmm. Einstein worked in a patent office when he did his greatest work. And once he became Albert Einstein and people started courting him and asking him to teach stuff, he never had, well, he may have had another breakthrough. I don't know about it. Mm-hmm. So as we're talking about generalism, we're at a time that you don't need to go prove yourself to any school or instructor to be great. If you have dyslexia and you can't fill out the forms well enough to get into the Academy of Fine Dance, who cares? You don't need it anymore.
Yeah.
So, and let's be honest, college education is just, it's gone crazy. It's a very expensive 4-year party. But how else can I help you with generalism? I had some basic thoughts.
Well, I just, I'm enjoying just how you've been tying everything together. And it's like, that's exactly it for me. But mostly so for in my, and I'm trying to, assimilate all my thoughts here too. When we're talking about success, this was something I really had to sit down and have a serious conversation with myself about, is what is going to make my life better? Because I've achieved all these different things and it felt good, when I got the first book published, or, whenever, even going back to getting my first pull-up, when I first started getting in shape, or when I launched my business or got it, those were all nice things. But when I oriented myself just on that specific thing, it was always, life was in anticipation, and then the arrival was so short and then it was gone. And it sounds like, just like you had those talks with, with your wife, Tiffany, is like, oh, did that really mean that much to you? And for me, the answer was, no, not really. So I've tried my best over these 3 years to completely reorient my life, and that's where generalism kind of came into place. And I really found that what makes my life better is I like doing things more so than I even like achieving things. So for example, as I'm writing this book, I love having this conversation. It's part of the process of writing the book. And eventually that book will come out and will be done. But I think I'm doing a much better job of enjoying all the things that are going into what I hope will eventually become a success. But even if it's not, I mean, sure, I would be a little upset still if the book completely tanked. But I think I've done a much better job of trying to enjoy the process along the way. And as much as I have been able to, I've been trying to tie that concept of the road, not the destination, into generalism.
I think you're very wise. I don't know if you've read the book Think Like a Freak, but they actually helped me. Okay, Freakonomics. They have a book. Yep. They have a book called Think Like a Freak, and this book helped me immensely. I wish this book would have come out 30 years ago, but one of the big points thinking like a freak is know what to measure. And so if you're a fitness coach, I would say you measure the waistline in centimeters. Mm-hmm. If you're a throws coach, you measure distance. As an author, as I say to people, and it sounds odd, I measure royalties. Because the way reviews are done nowadays, they're so bogus. I mean, you go on. I read someone's poor interview the other day on a book, and they got a 1-star review because they didn't like the format in Kindle. Well, for God's sakes, well, what about the book? Well, so I can't read reviews. Your book on fasting on Amazon is not reviewed well at all.
Yeah, no. And, my goodness. And it's like, if you don't battle for those reviews, what chance do you have?
And you got 3-star reviews from people who like the damn book.
Yeah, that's what I get. And some people will get it. Some people are like, I'm giving this book 5 stars. It's maybe like 4.5, but I see everyone giving 1 star because they didn't like the formatting. So a few people will get it and try and balance it out. But then a lot of the other people, and I don't know. I get frustrated with it, as I'm sure I remember you posted your last book, like your first review was a complete bogus review, right? And this was before I got mine, and I had to go counteract that one. Because it does the world a tremendous disservice when something like that goes up.
So the point of the book is know what to measure. So you've got it. So for me, I go on there and I see that bastard writing that thing, and I thought, what a lunatic you are. What? In fact, did he even read the book? Because he wrote it before. It was like that guy who used to. He would go on every book on Amazon and have glowing reviews as a fellow author, and then he'd hot link his books.
Oh, no, I never heard of that. But wow, okay. Crafty bastard.
Yeah. So he'd go to William Shakespeare. I enjoy Hamlet because as a fellow author, here's my book. And so they finally dealt with him. But I thought that was delightful,
Well, my favorite, that's always been a funny thing is like, Mark Twain didn't need to tell people he was a writer, right? Like whoever the top powerlifter, like you don't have to say that you're a powerlifter. Your work demonstrates that for you, right? Like if you're a writer, then you just write. If you're a strength coach, well, then you coach people. You live. You don't have to announce it.
Right. So the first step, I think, in success is finding a measurement. And here's a measurement my wife and I use for a start, because you don't know how you do as a parent. You really don't. But here's the measurement I talked to Tiffany about when we were young. I said, I'd like my daughters to be debt-free out of college, and I would like my daughters to move out of the house willingly as soon as they can. Now, this is something I heard when I was very young. And this, by the folks listening, what I'm saying here might not be right or wrong. I'm just saying this was the measurement we used. If your kids can't wait to get out in the world, you've taught them that the world is a great and wonderful place. Mm-hmm. If they stick around and never want to leave, you've taught them that the world's a dangerous place. Mm-hmm. And so, I hate to say this, but you don't know how to measure your children. did they get an award at the school, thing? Yeah. But what does that mean? It's a popular, did they have the right last name, which is really big here in Utah Catholic schools? They just if you have the right last name, and I hate to say it, but at one school, the last name John was a good name to have, so you need to come up with measurements. The other thing, this one, okay, my work on Beowulf, right? Do you know it, by the way?
I do, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, the warrior and the king.
Mm-hmm.
This next one's a kingly approach, but warriors live in the pure present, but you're successful when at a kingly moment in your life. That's when you look at things past, present, and future.
Yep.
You can nod your head and say, yeah, that one was good. Let's be honest. We all have moments in our life that we came home to our friends maybe and bragged about an event, and then years later you're like, that wasn't the best moment of my life. One great thing, Kahlil Gibran said, the prophet Kahlil Gibran, the poet
Yep.
from, he said, at the happiest moments in your life, look into your heart and you'll see the seed of your saddest moments. And at the saddest moments of your life, look into your heart and see your happiest moments.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've often thought the reason I was a good athlete is when I won, and that was proved at the Olympic Training Center. When I won, it was always overcoming a terrible moment. And when you're at a funeral and you're struggling because your mom and dad are dead, it's probably because some of the happiest moments of your life are being put 6 feet under.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that, I think, is another good way to look at success. Is I hate saying years later, because that's not fair. But years later, you look back on it and say that, I had a goal as a ninth grader to throw the discus for the Utah State University with Coach Ralph Mann, and I said that in the ninth grade. Well, 6 years later, he called me up, and I was a junior college, and he said, I'm Coach Ralph Mann from Utah State University. I'd like to offer you a full ride scholarship to Utah State. The little side note would be this. Those 6 years were really, really tough. And was it worth it? Well, I look back now, it's like, oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But boy, not going on dates, not drinking, not partying, being in long bus rides every weekend, going to crap hole California, crap hole Idaho, and to throw in a meet, and then getting a bus ride back. When I was at Utah State, Playboy magazine said that Utah State was a top 10 party school. And someone showed that to me, and I looked and I said, what? Honest to God, what? What? But it was worth it. And so we're sliding a little bit away. But
I think it's really important. And like anything else, you kind of need to do maybe some of the wrong things, or at least have the experience to form that perspective. Maybe you didn't know that was going to be a success right away, but looking back over the years, you definitely have a better sense from which you can now orient yourself. And, even though I may have pursued certain points of success in the past, and not to say that I regret those, they've all culminated in one way or another to who I am today, but they've at least shifted my perspective and given me a certain insight of how I can better orient myself to success moving forward.
Yeah. The phrase that Earl Nightingale uses, success leaves tracks. Mm-hmm. And I have found that to be absolutely true. And that's why I like autobiographies or good biographies so much. On my shelf over here, I've got the guy, Pete Townsend's. I can't see it very well, but 7 Days of Sunday was basically a bunch of biographies. But good biographies, good autobiographies show you. When I was in college, Andrew Carnegie's biography. Mm-hmm. Put all your eggs in one basket, he said, but keep an eye on that basket. You read, and because you'll see the same tracks, And sometimes it's not positive. Both Tommy Kohner, the great Olympic lifter, and my good friend John Powell, the discus thrower, both told me that once you specialize, if you're not elite in 2 or 3 years, you're not good enough.
Yeah.
So part of being this is a nice, damn it, dude, that is a nice little thing for your book.
I'm taking it down.
Here's the thing. Once you decide to go all in, you got 2 to 3 years. And if you're not, ain't happening. Mm-hmm. Now, you could be something like Rodney Dangerfield, who did, for a long time, strip club stand-up comedy acts for a long, long time. But he also mastered this art of stand-up, his own style.
Yeah.
It's funny to look at, if you get a chance on Open Culture, they have Steve Martin's first public appearance on the Smothers Brothers show.
Oh man, his old stuff is great. Well, I haven't seen that, but
it's older than the old stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, he does a magic show, but he's also pushing the boundaries. And oddly,
well, he's a great generalist because he's somebody who was able to combine a bunch of different skills into his specific skill of stand-up. But the performance art aspect, the musicality was one.
Have you seen his jokes? Yeah. Take his master class.
I did. I did. I loved it.
Oh, me too. I loved it.
We were in the same class. We could have been accountability buddies. What the hell?
Oh man.
What the hell?
Yeah, it was great. I love that.
Yeah, it was like what, like $99. It was so great. Yeah.
And I also did Kevin Spacey's acting one.
How was that one?
It was good. It was good when he was talking to camera, but probably a big slice of them are his helping his students more. And there are some things there that I did like, but I saw there's a new one with Dustin Hoffman, and it looks a little bit more. Listen, I love the Kevin Spacey one, but I actually used a number of his things. Here, let me tell you one thing I picked up. Are you ready?
I am.
Monologue, dialogue, soliloquy. And I transform that into how people coach. Monologue is this. Okay, now we're going to do bench press. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That looked easy. Let's do another set. 1. So that's monologue.
Yep.
Lowest form of coaching. Dialogue is when you and I talk, which is a higher level. Mm-hmm. We converse. We go clarify. The highest level is soliloquy, and that's when you start talking to yourself and tell me, tell the world really what to do.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to get my athlete to do. Is I tell people all the time, they wonder, I don't like going to track meets with my athletes. I want them to problem solve. And I mean, sometimes it's fun, but sometimes it's a pain in the ass. Mm-hmm. But so, you're my discus thrower, Pat Flynn, and I'm walking you through. I go to a track meet. Next track meet, say, okay, you call me. Let me know how you did. You call up on the phone and you have a story. You didn't throw far. And I go, why didn't you throw far? You say, I forgot my throwing shoes. Well, did you go through your checklist? I don't have a checklist. Remember I told you need a checklist? Yeah. Okay, so when they get back, we laminate a checklist for them. So he always remembers his throwing shoes. And you do that over time, and pretty soon they'll call you on the phone, and 2 things will happen. One thing, coach, I noticed that blah, 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 but here's how I'm going to fix it. From now on, training, we're going to blah, blah, blah. Or I'm the national champion. Congratulations. It's that's how your conversations start to get after a while.
Well, you bring up another important point to the process, which is having some type of ritual. It's so funny you brought up the Steve Martin masterclass because I actually just finished it. I got behind a little bit, and then they sent an email, and I finished it. And success leaves tracks, right? And it seems like anybody who's successful in anything has some type of ritual. So you're working on a lot of things right now. I told you I got your new book, and you didn't know how. I somehow got your new book that has been released. What's your ritual for writing look like? So, I mean, as somebody who writes so much, and what book number is this for you now? The hard style one. What number is that?
Oh, 12.
12. Yeah. So
two a year.
Yeah, I'd be very interested in your ritual for.
Well, okay, you're going to miss the keys here. Everybody misses the keys. Mm-hmm. Well, I have 16 of the exact same polo shirt, exact same.
Yep.
Because all they had in North America was those 16.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to make. Last night, my wife came home and there was steak, artichokes, those small potatoes, a salad, and then one more thing that was, okay, I don't remember what the other. Oh, corn. I also made corn because sweet corn this is a good time of year for certain things in Utah.
It is. Mm-hmm.
Well, why? Because that's what Thursday night's menu is. So Wednesdays I do laundry. Tuesdays I do the big floor in there. I have a schedule for my chores. Mm-hmm. I have a schedule for the meals. I have a shopping list. I basically wear just one basic shirt. Okay. I've bought 4 pairs of Barbell brand jeans. I have 4 pairs of Nike Frees. So let's start there.
By taking decisions off the table.
Take decisions off the table. Then what I try to do is make every day great. So I do that, but before I go to bed, about a couple hours before bed, early really, I make my to-do list for the next day. Mm-hmm. If it's something simple like send out an email, I'll tell Tiff, I'm going to write this email. I send it out and it's off my to-do list. We're down to 3 things now. Before I go to bed, I make sure the coffee's ready. The smell of coffee is what wakes me up in the morning. Okay. Smell of napalm was another joke, but unless they've seen Apocalypse Now, it's not funny. So about an hour or so before I go to bed, I put on my blue blocking glasses if I'm watching a movie or a football game or something.
Yep.
We always hot tub and ice shower before we go to bed. I have a white noise maker in the bedroom because I feel that you start the day by how you go to bed.
Yeah.
I wake up in the morning. I take care of my Columbia College religious studies work. Mm-hmm. I clear off my emails. And you'll notice that, right? Getting right back, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We were emailing in the morning. Yeah. And look at now, here we are in the afternoon.
Yeah, exactly. And then what I do then is I try to knock out every bit of writing I need to do. Mm-hmm. And I write probably from about 6:30 to 9 o'clock every day. Mm-hmm. At 9, I get ready to work out because people show up at my house at 9:30. Monday, Wednesday, Friday now, I Olympic lift. Tuesday, Thursday, I do loaded carries and mobility work. Mm-hmm. And everybody I know knows on my computer, okay? Are you ready for this? This is a tribute to you in a way. Let me read what's on the piece of paper on my computer. Are you ready for this?
Please, yeah.
Pirate map for record breakers. That's the weightlifting meet coming up. Mm-hmm. 1, sleep ritual. Make coffee for the morning. Blue blocking glasses after 8 o'clock. Hot tub and ice shower after taking supplements, especially magnesium, fish oil, and medications. 2, wake up and be grateful. I got that from you. Resets from Tim Anderson. I do a couple mobility moves. 3, 1-minute meditation. That's an app on my phone.
Yep.
3 days.
I have that app, by the way. It's a great
app. 3 days a week Olympic lift, and then there's some notes on that. 3 days a week original strength, and then the final one: eat 8 different veggies a day.
What more could you possibly need? I'm gonna have to write that whole thing out for the show notes just so people can
ping me an email and I'll just cut and paste.
That would be great. That would be even better.
Yeah. Well, hang on. I'm doing it right now.
I mean, all decisions are off the table, right? So you don't have to worry about, well, how am I? Because there's the saying, I forget who said it, but writing isn't hard. What's hard is sitting down to write.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny to, this would be nice. Actually, this is a better one. Actually, I should, here, and I'm also giving you my notes from what Tim told me to do too. So and just make sure you give some kind of ping in Tim Anderson's way. Okay.
I love Tim. I'm going to have Tim. I have to reach out to get onto this show because we've been talking a little bit back and forth. I met up with Tim. My wife is from Raleigh, so we go down there, and I've met up with him a few times. And what is a good dude, person man. Tim is. He really is.
And Pat Flynn, hardstyle kettle. Is that okay?
Yeah, that one. Yeah, the other one just redirects.
Oh yeah. Oh, why didn't it go in?
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, what an amazing, the pirate map idea of just, hey, we might not need a dissertation on all this stuff.
No. And, but the thing is, so every time.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
By taking things off the table, so to speak, I don't, like, for example, today it wasn't a big workout. In pounds, I had to snatch 175, and clean and jerk 205. Mm-hmm. That's what I had to do. That was the total I had to do. Well, I've known about this all week, so there was no surprises, and that's what I did. Mm-hmm. And I did have to kind of wake up a little mentally on the snatch, to be honest with you, because, but don't worry about it. But it was already that's just what the workout was. You eat 8 different vegetables a day. That could be one piece of celery. Mm-hmm. But the idea is every time I choose a vegetable, I'm Olympic lifting in the last weekend of October. Every time I do my 1-minute meditation, I'm Olympic lifting the last weekend of October. Mm-hmm. So I hope you're following this, because this is all. So for my Olympic lifting meet, I needed a pirate mat. Everything else is just habits. It's just what I do. Mm-hmm. So nowhere in my pirate map there was get up at 6 and do my Columbia College, because that's work. I got to do work to get paid. So I don't need to write that down. But if it's all built in, it's built in. That's a major thing about getting a lot of stuff done. Having stuff built in. How do you explain built in? Where's your Scotch tape?
My Scotch tape in this house, I'm not quite sure, because we're visiting my parents for the week.
Okay, no problem. You win. Okay, so I'm looking at my desk right now, and there is right there the cleaner that I use for my computer and my cell phone. There's the little thing. There's the big bucket full of pens and the scissors. There's a Scotch tape. There's a stapler. There's my to-do bucket. There's letters. If I have to send a letter, I'm so sorry. I'm thinking what happened. And I also have, I buy blank cards for any occasion. It's got like a bird on the cover or whatever. Yep. Oh, and then forever stamps are right there. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so those are all built in. I never have to look for a stamp because it's right there.
Yep.
My 3-hole punch is right. Literally, I'm touching it right now. There's my stacks for my upcoming stuff. There's all my discus stuff right there. Yeah. So how built in can you be? With our menu when the girls were young, we tried to build it in that we only had one crock pot. So I staggered crock pot meals. It was Wednesday was crock pot, and then the weekend was a crock pot meal. Mm-hmm. So we had time to clean it if any issues had come up. But I made Wednesday's dinner Tuesday with some of the ingredients that we had used Tuesday's meal.
I think we can tie that into a point earlier that you said, humans get fatter the more choices you give them, right? I think they may become less productive as well.
When Tiffany was sitting next to me she went to Norway with me, and I just dropped that. The guy's name just dropped out of my head. I apologize. James. When James said that, Tiff said the menu, and she kind of got a nod. And you could see her staring off, and I could see her brain replaying raising our girls. Mm-hmm. Because our girls woke up every day to either crack oatmeal, which is oatmeal I made with a lot of protein powder in it, which was delicious, smelled like oatmeal cookies, but no sugar at all in it.
Yep.
Or pirate eyes, which is toast with an egg in the middle of it,
Oh, you call that? That's interesting. I've called that so many different things. Hollywood egg in a basket.
Egg in a basket, yeah.
Pirate eyes? I've never heard that one.
Yeah, so every morning I made them breakfast every morning. They would wake up and Lindsay would bitch about it every morning in her entire life. I hate pirate eyes. And then I'd look over and she'd scarf 2 of them down. Okay.
Yeah, how can you hate that?
And then I would take the circles and make French toast out of it. So they always had two eggs at least for breakfast.
See, the circles were the mop for me. You get those circles.
Okay.
Any extra yolk or anything. Yeah. But I like the French toast. That's an even better idea.
And then every night when they walked in the door, they had a prepared meal, and they would complain about, that's just the same. We always have this on Thursday. Right. I know, dear. If you want to cook something else, you go ahead.
Yeah. Well, what is charity but to make an end great right now?
Yeah, exactly. So for me, I called it the systems approach to stuff, but I like the idea where you're heading with a generalist, because have you noticed that I'm the person that cooks?
Yeah, I didn't know that, but then you mentioned it in the email, and now I know that.
I'm the person that cleans because my wife works for the federal government. She has a really weird schedule. She's on the road a lot. I do this, I do that. I'm not, oh, woe is me. Woe is me. Woe is me. I'm just saying that, if you're going to do all this stuff, why not take an extra minute and a half and use your brain to work through it a little bit? And have a system. For example, I have an app on my phone that controls my friend Bob. And Bob is a motorized vacuum cleaner.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And every day at 9:30, when I'm working out, Bob goes in and we have this massive, anyone's ever been to my house will tell you, it's a big house. It's bigger now. Way too big for us. Well, the upside is we have a sauna, hot tub, ice shower, full gym, full backyard. I mean, it's just 6 bedrooms, 3 baths.
Yeah, well, let me just know when you want me to be there.
Move in, yeah.
Yeah.
And so Bob is part of at 9:30 every day. My man Bob goes and does the wooden floors on the whole main part of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And his job is to do the wooden floors in the whole main part of the house. And that's his job.
And he doesn't complain about it.
On Thursdays, we have a dairy. We have the dairy come by, so we don't have to. We only shop. We shop generally on Saturday or Sunday after we eat, and then we go online if we run out of food to have the Winder Dairyman bring it, so that we don't go to the store and buy, in my case, Fritos because that's my crack. And that way, decision making. These are systems, and you build all this in, and pretty soon you're not making stupid. And someone said to me, "Isn't having a dairy guy drop it off more expensive?" And I said, I'm going to give you a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old, and you're going to go shopping for milk.
Yeah. And you're going to learn a lesson that you can learn no other way.
And you're going to tell me about saving money with having someone deliver milk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We probably
it's like picking up a cat by its tail.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Sometimes you just got to do it to learn, what you're getting yourself into.
That's right. But I really love what you're doing here. I think there's some genius here. And the funny thing too, let me just add one more thing. When you're a generalist, for whatever reason, more doors seem to open. I don't know if you have been thinking about that as much.
The opportunities definitely increase. At least they have for me.
Yeah, I was thinking about retyping only my award-winning poems and putting them online.
I would buy it. You would have...
Well, not buy it. It'd be free, of course.
Not even $1. Don't they make you charge $1 if you put it on Amazon? But you would just put it on your blog, right?
Yeah, probably. Oh, maybe I should. The poems.
Yeah, because I tried to put something for free on Amazon, I think, not too long ago, and they make you. I think they make you. I'm not sure. Yeah. I have to double check. Yeah. Either way, anyway, your poems.
But yeah, the more when I would every high school I ever taught, I would always go to the poetry clubs. They call them jams or slams or something like that now. And I would ask, can I read my work? And I'd always try to read something that's a little bit newer. And the students would be like, isn't he he's like the football coach, the strength coach. He's like the history teacher. And so what I did is I found that the students who go to the poetry club, after hearing my poetry, all of a sudden became much more an ally in my classroom, because I had shared some myself. Yeah. I listened to their work. I like what you did. And all of a sudden, years later, some of the kids who are in the poetry club lift weights with me now.
Well, if nothing else, a generalist just increases your interest and you have more common points of interest with other people.
Well, we were talking about Mark Fisher Fitness.
Yeah.
And if someone at Mark Fisher Fitness, when I first spoke there a few times, someone, I would like to say they were, I can't decide if they were being kind or heckling, but they said, what kind of Broadway plays do you write? And so I went through my litany and my critiques of my favorite Broadway musicals. And all of a sudden I saw this person go, okay, all right. I'll leave the big crazy man alone because he knows his Broadway.
Yeah, he knows his Broadway. He knows more than just goblet squats.
He knows more than, yeah. And I know my Broadway very well. And the thing is, well, of course you should know Broadway. You should also know movies and not just Marvel Comics movies. I'll tell you, if you don't have the link, make sure you put this link. Okay, I don't want to lose our conversation. but you should make sure you link up this place online called Open Culture.
Open Culture.
Openculture.com. And I suggest strongly that every weightlifter in the world go there daily and just look. You don't have to look at every YouTube thing. Fascinating conversation with Robin Williams and Steve Martin this week. How the Babylonians discovered trigonometry easier and sooner because they had a 60. Their numbers are based on 60 rather than 10. I mean, I was just sitting there going, by God, that's basing a number system on 60 different numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say, what's a third of 10? You have a fraction.
Mm-hmm.
What's a third of 60? You have 20.
Yes.
So, what's half of 60? 30, brilliant. And so it's very well worth your time to go in and scramble around. And I'm not saying you have to be a psychopath and be an expert in every field, but out of nowhere sometimes you'll find something that ping hits you in the head. And now in the things you love the most, I can guarantee. I'm just looking at one of my books that's sitting on the shelf. It's called Intervention. I'm sure if I flipped through it, I would find quotes from maybe Jurassic Park or someplace, something in there, because all the stuff makes you better at everything.
Well, it helps you create analogy, which is taking something that might be unknown and tying into something that people already know. And yes. I don't see how you could do that if you aren't at least somewhat of a generalist. And that's why you're so good at it, is that you can tie weightlifting into Jurassic Park or into things that Aristotle may have said, or your background in theology, because you know that stuff.
Yeah.
You're a generalist.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I keep.
No, I was just going to say, should we talk about the goblet squat?
Well, actually, the goblet squat. Well, let's talk about the goblet squat.
Because the one thing I wanted, and this is really important, in a lot of the shows, I don't link to specific sections because I don't want people to just skip ahead and be like, oh, I'm just going to wait till Dan John starts talking about strength training. The truth is, I'm sure you talk about strength training on most podcasts, and I wanted to hear people talk about Dan John, talk about Thomas Aquinas for a little bit, and all these other things in life that have made Dan John Dan John.
Okay, let's tell you what. Can you give me like a minute or so to talk?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
There's no time limit on my show. All I care about is just wherever the conversation takes us.
Okay. So let's just go through a couple of things. This is why when someone says they invented the goblet squat, you just tell them to F off. Okay. So my name is Daniel Arthur David John. Arthur, I guess, was my uncle who got, of course, back my mom's favorite uncle. And so even as a kid, I was I loved The Sword and the Stone. And I like Robin Hood too. Well, I wasn't a very good reader, and I barely could speak because of speech impediment. And I decided I want to play in the NFL for some reason. I don't remember why now. So I went to this thing called a library. And in this thing called a library, I found a book called 7 Days to Sunday by Elliot Asanoff. And, of course, that's where on Wednesday we meet Kenny Avery, who in high school did the hurdles, threw the shot put, and threw the discus. And because of that, I hurdled, shot, and threw the discus. Because of that, I paid for all my education, my body, throwing the discus. Mm-hmm. As I walked down the hall, picking up that one book, because I thought that would teach me how to play football better, the librarian recommends a book called The Sword in the Stone. And it's about a young King Arthur learning to pull the sword out of the stone. So when I was in college getting my master's, the two things, my first published work is Arturus Rex Superstar. Mm-hmm. King Arthur Superstar, where I discussed the 39 different endings of the stories that I found, okay, which was fascinating. And that was my first published thing. And the next thing I had published was the thing on Beowulf, okay? Did you know that?
Well, I didn't know it was in that order.
Yeah, okay. So The Sword and the Stone is the book that transformed me into being a reader. Okay. Now, do you mind? with your...
That's always one of my favorite questions, by the way, to people who are readers and writers. I always like to know, what was that book that got you? And so for you, it was The Sword in the Stone.
Can I just read a little part of it?
Of course.
Now, here's why. So young King Arthur, they call him Wart in the book, finds a sword that's stuck in a stone. So he wants to pull it out for his friend Sir Kay. Ready? "Come, sword," he said. "I must cry your mercy and take you for a better cause." "This is extraordinary," said the Wart. "I feel strange when I have hold of this sword, and I notice everything much more clearly. Look at the beautiful gargoyles of the church and of the monastery which belongs to. See how splendidly all the famous banners in the aisle are waving. How nobly that yew holds up the red flakes of its timbers to worship God. How clean the snow is. I can smell something like feverfew and sweet briar. And is it music that I hear? It was music, whether of pan pipes or of recorders, and the light in the churchyard was so clear, without being dazzling, that one could have picked a pin at 20 yards away." Okay, hold now. This is when it gets important. "There is something in this place," said the Wart. "There are people. Oh, people, what do you want?" Nobody answered him, but the music was loud and the light beautiful. "People," cried the Wart, "I must take this sword. It's not for me, but for Kay. I will bring it back." There was no answer, and Wart turned back to the anvil. He saw the golden letters, which he did not read, and the jewels on the pommel, flashing with lovely light. "Come, sword," said the Wart. He took hold of the handles with both hands and strained against the stone. There was a melodious consort of the recorders, but nothing moved. "It is well fixed," he said. He took hold of it again and pulled with all of his might. The music played more. I'll skip. "Oh, Merlin," cried the Wart, "help me to get this weapon." There was a rushing noise. And all around the church, there were hundreds of old friends. They rose over the church wall all together, like the Punch and Judy ghosts of remembered days. "Remember my biceps," said the oak, "which can stretch out horizontally against gravity when all the other trees go up or down. Put your back into it," said the loose or pike, off of those heraldic banners, "as you once did when I was going to snap you up. Remember that power springs from the nape of the neck." "What about those forearms?" asked Badger gravely, "that are held together by a chest? Come along, my dear embryo, and find your tool." A Merlin, sitting at the top of the yew tree, cried out, "Now then, Captain Wart, what is the first law of the foot? I thought I once heard something about never letting go." You might recognize that.
Mm-hmm.
"Don't work like a stalling woodpecker," urged the tawny owl affectionately. "Keep up a steady effort, my duck, and you'll soon have it yet." "Cohere," said a stone in the church wall. A snake, slipping easily along the coping which bounded the holy earth, said, "Now then, Wart, if you are once able to walk with 300 ribs at once, surely you can coordinate a few little muscles here and there. Make everything you work together, as you've been learning to do ever since God let the amphibian crawl out of the sea. Fold your powers together with the spirit of your mind, and it'll come out like butter. Come along, Homo sapiens, for we humble friends of yours are waiting here to cheer." The Wart walked up to the great sword for the third time. He put out his right hand softly and drew it out as gently as from a scabbard. So in The Sword and the Stone, you find never let go. You find my approach to mental training.
Mm-hmm.
You find, so The Sword and the Stone has in it how to lift weights.
It does. It has
That's right.
anatomy.
Yes. And so when I first started teaching the goblet squat, it was called the Grail squat.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And that was too stupid. And then I called it the chalice squat, but I thought that was too Catholic. And then I called it the goblet squat from Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
And ever since then, it kind of took off. So when people say I invented the goblet squat, and the I does not refer to Dan John, you could look them in the eye and say, did you ever read The Sword and the Stone?
Well, yeah, I'm always so tempted when I was at the gym here the other day and I saw someone doing goblet squats. I just want to go up to them and be like, my friend invented that exercise. His name's Dan John.
We should have a quiet moment.
So from here, the one thing I definitely want to touch on to just kind of tie everything together is applying, and this is one of the things that I've always been very interested in your opinion of, and that you have had opinions of. If you were to say there are a set of standards, which I know Dan John has definitely laid out a few standards before, but in the context of generalism, when it comes to lifting or fitness, it doesn't have to necessarily just be lifting. And I know your standards are always shifting, so don't let me think like you have to have something absolutely nailed down. But what would you begin to trot out?
Okay, for clarity on generalism itself, principles for generalism.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a good idea. I'd like both, for both principles of generalism from Dan John's view, and then specifically applying generalism in the weight room.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Let's go back to September 1977. I got to tell you two things, Coach Ralph Mahn. Make yourself a slave to good habits.
Mm-hmm.
If you have good habits, you don't get bogged down in the minutia of life. You're not getting distracted by the white laundry basket, because white laundry's done on Monday.
Yep.
And today is Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
If you have good habits, you make less bad choices weekly in your eating. Okay? And then the second thing is little and often over the long haul.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you need, for your sake, you would need to practice the guitar daily, maybe a little less, but I would have to say daily, but often.
Yeah, I've found that's been very interesting for just about any skill. And I'm sure there are exceptions in some skills that I haven't explored.
Sure.
Frequency seems to be the most important variable.
Well, it's funny with this, everyone keeps blasting the talent code thing,
mm-hmm.
About the 10,000 hours of practice.
Mm-hmm.
And they looked at the research and stuff, and you can master things here. Yeah. However, having said that, I have rarely seen mastery without there's that guy's trying to do it with golfing. He's trying to golf 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day to prove the book.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're missing the point, I think. I think if he practiced an hour a day for 10,000 days, he would get farther than 10 hours a day. Oh, yeah.
I would imagine so, because I think, to bring the guitar example, I'm a living example of that. There were times when I would play guitar for 8 to 10 hours a day, but they weren't the most productive practice sessions, as I'm sure you can imagine. I mean, there's severe diminishing returns after a point. A lot of that time was spent just noodling around with stuff I'm already good at. Now I practice a minimum 30 minutes a day. Usually it's more around an hour, sometimes up to 2 hours, but Parkinson's law kicks in. And, when I know I only have 30 minutes of practice, you better bet that I'm going to be working on something that I'm not good at.
Exactly. Okay. So to me, those would be the foundational principles. And then the other one would be this. If there's a third, the best are the best at the basics.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do is I call it I have two things. I call it the prisoner's dilemma is the one. If you only had I ask masters all the time, if you only had 3 15-minute sessions a week, what would you do for your goal? And that's that. I tell you one thing, the clarity on that people have. They'll go like this. The good coaches will go like this. Okay. That's good. I like that. And then you'll hear something, a Olympic lifter will say something like, front squats and squat snatches. And, oh, really? What about clean and jerks? No. You said 15 minutes. And, you'll hear a soccer coach say some interesting things. And the other one is, what are the 3 keys to success in your field? Mm-hmm. And whatever those. So maybe, and then when you get those, the prisoner's dilemma answer or the 3 keys, often they're the exact same. It doesn't, but it's nice to have 2 questions just to get people thinking. Those, if I tell you, so this is what this basketball coach told me. He said, free throws when tired, transitional defense, offensive rebounds. if I go into coaching basketball, which I know nothing about, we're going to have a lot of offensive rebound drills, and we're going to practice transition defense, and we're going to be doing a lot of tired free throws.
Yeah.
Now, you might be a better coach than me. But we're going to be okay because we're going to practice the three that win games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So those three things. So slave to good habits, little and often over the long haul, and then being better at the basics.
The best are the best at the basics.
The best are the best at the basics.
I mean, it's classic Dan John wisdom, and it applies to, I think, everything that we've talked about so far. All right, so we're going to drag that into the weight room now. Finally, we're going to talk about the weight room with Dan John after all this time. What are some generalist standards? And maybe I think we have the philosophy. I think we've kind of.
Well, let's go with I tell everybody. You need to do the fundamental human movements with appropriate sets, appropriate reps, and appropriate load. And the devil is in the details.
I mean, my favorite thing to do with people is still, of course, a classic Dan John exercise. I suspect this is probably in your new HKC book. I haven't got there yet, which I definitely want to talk about. And I don't know if you invented this as well or just the first person to tell me about it, but the damn get up with a Dixie cup of water.
Now, I saw that at another thing, but I'm to the point now that we never do what you would consider a traditional kettlebell Turkish get-up, a loaded Turkish get-up.
Yeah.
We do all kinds of get-ups, but we just, because of the kind of athletes I work with who either haven't yet hurt their shoulder or already have, why I don't want them in a treacherous position. So it's funny when the water spills on.
Yeah, it is. I'm there too. I guess I was never sold on the utility of doing really, really heavy get-ups. I love get-ups for many other different things, but I never got much out of the super heavy feat of strength type of get-up.
And there is no Olympic Games for it, so who cares?
Yeah, but, what are you going to do with that? You're going to post yet another video on Instagram of you doing a get-up with your 105-pound girlfriend?
Yeah, I got her now. Yeah. So, I mean, if you're taking information here from like Josh Hillis, you might be something like your workout would be dips, pull-ups. I like rack deadlifts for most people. Let's just say goblet squat and then farmer walks. Mm-hmm. And then after you do the lifting part, because that's what you wanted to do, we maybe do some work on the ground. Turkish get-ups be fine, tumbling be fine, maybe whatever. But if you just kept coming back and what do they say, rinse, repeat, or whatever, you'd be pretty damn good. So the biggest mistake, and I am a strength coach, is the weight room. It's so easy to do more in the weight room. That doesn't mean it's better. It's just more. Mm-hmm. And trying to get people to understand that is very, at least in my experience, very difficult. And it comes, and I wrote an article about it recently. It does come from 1975, The Education of a Bodybuilder, and also the movie Rocky. They both came out basically the same exact time, and Pumping Iron. And that little combination got people thinking hypertrophy trumps everything else. Mm-hmm. And the bodybuilding paradigm. Well, that's all fine and dandy. There's nothing wrong with bodybuilding, but bodybuilding is not athletic training. Bodybuilding can certainly be great for an older population. But for many people, it's just more. And I tell people this, it breaks their little hearts, but most people aren't strong enough to get anything from the weight room in hypertrophy. Mm-hmm. If I get you stronger, the hypertrophy work would make you better. So let's do it this way. Let's just, if you want my matrix for this talk, I'll just send that to you.
That'd be great.
I'll do it right now then.
Yeah, always better to do it while it's uppermost on the mind still.
Yeah, hang on.
But I mean, that is such a salient point that I think people miss. It's like, you're just not going to build that much muscle if you can only bench 135 pounds.
I tell people that and they think I'm a bad person. It's like, yeah, I'm not a bad person. You're just weak.
You're just weak. And you're not a bad person because you're weak. You're just weak.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, I'm not at all being look at me, blah, blah, blah. It's just, you're an adult male benching Not very much. And I can't fix that very well. Let's see. Okay, so here you go. It's going to be a pick.
Oh man, this is by far the meatiest episode. I think you've written my next book for me, Dan. I think I'm just going to transcribe this and put it between the covers, and I'll be done. It'll take me a tremendous amount of work.
So what I do is it's push, pull, hinge, squat, loaded, carry. Okay, that's what it is. All right, no surprises. Okay,
mm-hmm. I don't think anybody listening to this will be surprised.
But then, the first thing I teach you is, and you have the matrix. Takes a little longer to. And then across the top, there you go. And across the top, I call it planks as a program. But really, it's the idea of first, you got to teach tension. You've got to teach people what tension means. People think they know what tension is. They don't know what tension is. Mm-hmm. So you've got, and I was working with a young man the other day, and one was talking about the top position, overhead squats, and trying to apply tension to it. But he thought at the top of a squat snatch or whatever, you needed to have 10. Well, you can't. You wouldn't be able to hold it. Mm-hmm. You have to be tense, but out of that, a dynamic tension. So people need to learn first tension. Mm-hmm. Then as we move over, I tend to get people to work on pure strength. So this is where the fundamental human movements, appropriate reps, appropriate sets, this would be that rule of 10 that I have. You just want to get freaking strong. Mm-hmm. 2 sets of 5, 5 sets of 2, 3 sets of 3, get strong. From there, same piece of equipment, same exercises, you then could add, if you need it, hypertrophy. And then you slide your reps up to 15 to 25 in a workout. 3 sets of 8, 5 sets of 5, the classic workouts. Every so often, I suggest throwing a workout I call anti-rotation, one-arm work, just various. That'd be a suitcase carry, okay? And then from there, you add ballistic and dynamic. And on the far right of the chart is the clean and jerk, which basically works everything. And the squat snatch, which basically, by the way, I call it squat snatch now because for so many people think of power snatch as squat snatch. So just for clarity, squat snatch. And then, of course, you might never need those. You can also just do kettlebell swings, push jerks, and that little family of exercises we call Litvinovs. Mm-hmm. Now, the example I sent you, do you have it up yet?
I can pull it up right now.
Oh, you don't need to. That's good enough. That's good enough for our purposes now. But then I do highlight some of them in red, which are the work capacity movements, and I add these yellow lines as the hinge. Don't worry about that. I just gave you more is more. So the way I look at training with this matrix is that it's if then again, isn't it?
It is coming all the way back around to the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah. If you don't know how to hold tension, that's where we start. If you just took 6 weeks off of a great, you won the Super Bowl, and I see you, we're going to start back with tensioning. You might only need one workout. It'll just be a kind of a gear change day to make sure we're going to do a goblet squat, just to make sure things are still where they were. Mm-hmm. Have you do a farmer walk and have you realize how much work capacity you've lost because of the season. Good. Now we got to get strong again. Okay, we got to get strong. And whether you need hypertrophy or not depends on your sport. And then we just start to move over. If I'm working with somebody who can't straighten out their arm because of an injury, well, we could probably do really high-end stuff. We could do, front squats followed by sprints, but our upper body work might be planks. Mm-hmm. Again, there's no judgment. If you can't straighten out your arm, then we do this. If you need this now, that's what we do. Mm-hmm. If you're not big enough, then we do hypertrophy. If you're a thrower, we need to do anti-rotation work. Probably 2 weeks of strength, 1 week anti-rotation, probably for a couple of months, and then slide over to the more dynamic stuff. Or if you're like me, just dynamic stuff all the time, snatch and clean and jerk all the time until you get so broken you can't walk. And then someone intervenes and you get a little smarter.
What is a This is brilliant. What is a monster walk, by the way? This one's new to me.
Oh, a monster. That's when you have the minibands around your.
Oh, okay. What a great name. You always have your names for things are always.
Yeah, actually, there's a better. Well, my friend Mike has a better one. He calls them John Wayne walks. I'm like, damn it, that's so much better.
Well, I mean, you always had that theory about coming up with weird names for things like Bulgarian goat bag and this and that, and it works. It definitely works.
That comes from Wittgenstein,
mm-hmm.
the philosopher, the Austrian philosopher who was from a very wealthy family and gave it all away and fought in the war, World War I, and lived in a tower wearing black all the time like an old wizard.
Mm-hmm.
Wittgenstein, whatever we agree the word means is what it means. And what I found as a coach, it's much better to call something bat wings, for example, than it is to say bench rows, because bench row takes me more time to explain than bat wing.
Yeah, and it's so ambiguous, bench row.
Yeah, and people slide in. They want to listen when you say, we're doing pups today. Pups. Yeah, push-up position planks. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, well, whatever. and even if you disagree about Litvinov's, the thing is, it's such a great name.
It is.
It's got that, anytime you can sex you up. And so, by the way, a bear hug carries with, so you're carrying a 100-pound bag with the John Wayne walk. You got that?
I do got that. Yeah, this matrix is. This is, when did you do this? I haven't seen this before.
Last few years, yeah.
Wow, how have I missed this one?
Because you don't follow my work.
I do. I follow your work obsessively. Where do you think I get my work from? Come on.
It was recently. I was with a guy who says, "Oh, I've read all your stuff," and he starts telling me stuff. It's like, and it became very clear, not just to me, that to the lovely Department of Treasury agent Tiffany, that the guy had not read shit of mine.
Yeah, well, this I'm surprised I haven't seen this. And I'm speaking of your work, I'm going to spend, as soon as we're done here, I'm going to be getting through that HKC book.
Okay.
Which, when does that come out, by the way?
Go talk about.
By the way, if it gets leaked on Reddit, it wasn't me.
Oh, you bet. It goes to press Monday.
Oh, wow, that's soon. Monday. So, on top of everything else, you somehow squeezed that book in too.
Yeah. In fact, it's funny. Some people told me, you wrote now what, this year? Yeah. And this book's coming out this year. Yeah. Well, how do you do that? And it's like, okay, so what I do before I go to bed?
Laundry's on Monday.
And you tell them these things, and they look at you, and then it's like, well, yeah, okay, but what's the secret? Well, you got to reread a lot of books, and I tell them basically everything we've talked about, and they still think that there's something hiding behind the green curtain over there.
Mm-hmm. And there's not. Writing is easy. Sitting down to write is hard. But you've got that part figured out once you become a slave to good habits.
Right. Well, I just sit down and do a company will email me and say, you do an article on this. An hour later, the one guy goes, you realize, because he paid me $500 for the article, you realize you make $500 an hour. I wrote him back. I said, no, it only took me 40 minutes. You didn't open your email for another 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You don't embarrass me with $500 an hour.
Who do you think I am?
I mean, God, I wouldn't have wrote the article if I'm that cheap. But thanks for doing this today. Listen, I'm going to have to run in a few minutes.
No, this has been great. I mean, I couldn't imagine a better generalist conversation than this.
Yeah.
So thank you, as always. We're going to have to continue this, but I'm going to have to just stay with this for a while.
I'm going to ask you a favor. I want you to have a chapter dedicated to minimalism and generalism. The general minimalist.
Well, I think that might have to be our next conversation. And a lot of the reasons I'm doing this show is to really help me flesh out a lot of these ideas. So this is everything we've just talked about.
Yeah. So these are
going to be in there in one way or another.
See, I would argue that these are complementary with an E, complementary concepts. That if you believe, okay, why do we want to be minimalists? Well, in my case, so I have more time to take naps, hang out, play with my dog, travel. But wait, Dan, then, okay, do you follow? So so there's two hands. And so minimalism allows me to have more playtime. But that playtime feeds my other, you follow?
I do. And that's why I love having these different perspectives. So, the way that I've kind of reconciled it or explained it is that for me, generalism is the philosophy, but minimalism is the approach. So, I am a generalist, but when it comes to developing skills, I take the approach of a minimalist, looking at everything that you've said, knowing what to measure, knowing what efforts are going to be effective. And then once you have the effectiveness figured out, all right, this is what I need to be doing to get from A to B. How do I become more efficient with that? And maybe that means figuring out my laundry schedule.
Yeah, stretch this out a little bit. So repeat what you just said, because okay, and then you got to throw in goal setting versus success in that little thing you just said too. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, say it again.
All right, I'm ready. This is my big TV interview. I have one shot. I can't blow it, right? Uh-huh. So generalism is a philosophy. Minimalism is the approach. Knowing what to measure, setting the right goals that are going to lead to success, making sure that the success ladder is not on the wrong wall, right, Dan? And then from there, making sure that you're being as effective as possible, doing the right things to get you from A to B. And then once you have the effectiveness part figured out, being as efficient as possible or economical with your input.
Which loops you back to the minimalism. So minimalism is what did you call it? The approach.
Generalism. If generalism is the philosophy, then minimalism is the approach.
Okay, make sure you write that down.
I'm going to taking it down right now. You should see the notepad on my phone. And I think that's one of my good slave to good habits things is I constantly have this annoying notepad app open it's so full and it's messy, but it really does help me get all my ideas.
So put in okay. So there's got to be a way to draw what you just said.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then, so the goal setting process has to include success, the right wall. Okay. Mm-hmm. The goal, we also have to make sure that we understand the balance of work, rest, play, and pray. Mm-hmm. And then how you measure, how you measure ties you back to your minimalism.
Got it all down.
Now, your job is to make a chart. I'm thinking, in my book, Now What? I made a yin-yang inside of a triangle, which I thought was genius.
Well, it's like your 4 quadrants thing was
but remember, these things take years, literally years, because it's conversations like this. But I'm not sure I've ever. Sometimes, by the way, there is a blank in there for a long time. Mm-hmm. In my Can You Go book, those interlocking circles.
Yep.
The Venn diagram. Mm-hmm. I didn't have a major component for a long time. I knew what I was thinking, but I didn't. The word is mobility. Mm-hmm. The mobility circle was empty for a long time because I didn't. It had to be something that was true for most of the men I was with. And I couldn't get my hand on what that would be.
It's so funny about those simple things. I mean, you look at the 4 quadrants, and if you didn't know Dan John, you didn't know the story, like, oh, he probably came up with that in 3 seconds. But actually, it was 30 years.
Yeah. So what is the impact of the strength coach? It might not be. You just instead of saying it depends, you say in quadrant 4, big. Mm-hmm. Quadrant 3, helpful. Quadrant 2, God only knows. You could be the strongest Delta Force guy ever and got blown up. Mm-hmm. And if you'd have benched 30 pounds more, it wouldn't have helped you. Mm-hmm. If you could run a faster marathon, wouldn't have. So, you can be the strongest football team on the field, get blown out. As I've seen. I know sometimes my teams are stronger. But stuff happens, you can't, sometimes talent beats you, You have LeBron, if you're playing high school basketball, you got LeBron James, good chance you're going to win. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah, I remember the master. The master always said something to me when he was coaching me in Taekwondo. I was never the most talented. And he said, what? Talent is going to beat you. Sometimes people win because they're just better than you. But at least be better conditioned.
Yeah. God, no kidding. That's so true.
And that always stuck with me. Yeah. So Dan, let's finish off with the customary, what's the best way to read your stuff, to get your books, to get on your email list, and to just learn all more things about Dan John?
Well, danjohn.net. And the thing is, please sign up for the listeners. If you do the Wandering Waits, only because you'll get a real sense of our conversation. Mm-hmm. And if you're insane, you'll go back and read them all. But
they're worth it.
I've had people say, you start to wormhole in those old ones. You start to go, and you skip over something. The thing is, I have a couple paragraphs from every reading, right? Which I think. So I try to pull out. Listen, look what I did. I try to give you the minimum effective dose of each article.
Yep.
And if you want more, you read more. Yeah. Many people say, I just skim through them because I just read what you think's important. And then sometimes, one person told me finally, and he goes, yeah, I thought I just read through them. And then I realized that there were all these links on my page where the articles were. They kept I'm not going to read that in a tablet, So, well, hey, thanks, Pat. As always, I hope this had value.
Dan John, it's been tremendous as always, and we're going to have to continue this conversation at some point. So I will link to Wandering Waits. I will compile this tremendous show notes resource, and I will get this off to the editor, that elusive editor, as soon as possible. So there hopefully isn't too much delay between this conversation when people start to hear it.
Hey, man, thanks so much for everything you do, okay?
Thank you. We'll talk soon.
All right, you're the best, man. Bye-bye.